Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Middle of the summer, but there's always so much to learn. And we're so excited and delighted to have Christine, the Senior Director from FINRA Investor Education Foundation, with us today. She's going to be teaching us how to fight financial fraud. A lot to learn. I've already learned a lot. She has a great, really beautiful presentation. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about financial social work, because we know that every month when we do our free webinar, certain populations join us based on the information and the topic, and might wonder, or do wonder, why we go to all this effort to bring these free monthly webinars. And it's because our growing financial social work community is most appreciative, as we've learned through the years. And there's just so much happening all the time with money. And it is part of the work that we do at the Center for Financial Social Work. So our work is on the fact that financial problems are about much more than money. We theorize and promote the concept that people's relationship with their money and with themselves is what drives our behavior, our own as well as our clients. And financial behavior, how we earn, spend, save, share, and borrow. Those behaviors determine our financial circumstances. So we know this is a unique approach. It is clearly a behavioral model. And we know that where our little turning arrow is, that's where the magic happens. We need to provide the financial education, motivation, validation, and support the client's need to take control of their money and gain control of their lives. Because dollars and cents don't make our financial choices. It's our inner money self. Think about it. Dollars and cents don't tell us what to buy or where to spend our money. So we focus a lot these days on connecting to your inner money self. Because financial circumstances originate from within the money self. And your money self includes the thoughts, feelings, actions that you take with your money and with yourself. And you can see this graphic. Money is not the problem. It's our relationship with our money that's the problem. So we are about financial behavioral change, and that requires a healthier money self, because someone with a healthier money self engages more readily, think about your clients, is more hopeful, is more eager to change, and more prepared to succeed. And financial social work focuses on a lot more than just those dollars and cents. Obviously, basic money management is a necessary tool, and we provide that. But we also help our students, our graduates, and their clients to come at this whole concept of financial wellness and financial well-being from a different perspective, more hopeful, more positive, increasing self-confidence, having personal and financial boundaries, just a whole healthier mindset. So our goal is always to help everyone in our community and their clients make peace with their money. Those of you who join us on a regular basis know how much I love this graphic. So the model looks like this: ongoing and highly experiential education, financial education, motivation, validation, and support. It's interactive, introspective, and strengths-based. It works well with individuals and with groups, and we have lots of financial therapists practicing financial social work. Okay, so we are so happy to be sharing this wonderful session with you. And I am going to go ahead and turn this over to Christine Kieffer. I have to.
Hello, everyone. This is Christine Kieffer, and just give me 1 second, make sure I have the right presentation up. I want to show the slideshow. There we are. Just a second, you will see the beginning of the slideshow. And just a little bit about me. I'm Christine Kieffer, as Rita mentioned. I've been with the FINRA Investor Education Foundation now for a little over 13 years and previously worked with the NASDAQ stock market. So I've really been working on financial education and financial capability building for about 20 years now. And the last decade or so, I've also had a specific interest and specialization in financial fraud, not only prevention strategies, but research around susceptibility, victimization, and interventions that are emerging as promising and effective. So hopefully today we can cover a little bit of that for you. Make sure I get my slides to move. There we are. So I just, before I introduced FINRA and the FINRA Foundation, I want to take a poll. So I'm going to use one of these polling questions. Let's see if I can get this to work. Here we are. Launch. Okay. So in just a second, you're going to see a poll. And what I want to know, just to get a sense of the audience, is, you know, what your reasons for joining today were. You know, to protect yourself from scams, protect your friends and family, and maybe it's all of these, but in general, you know, what was your primary driver for joining this webinar today? But, you know, assisting clients, to learn about reporting in general. So it looks like, for the most part, because you are professionals involved in financial social work, it looks like most of you are here to help better assess better assess. I meant better assist. I think there's a little typo there. To better assist clients in spotting fraud. That's okay. But good to know. Well, that's what we're going to be doing today. Let me go back to the slideshow. So the FINRA and the FINRA Investor Education Foundation. FINRA is the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, and FINRA, looks like you're not showing the right thing. FINRA regulates all stockbrokers and brokerage firms, and is a nonprofit, non-governmental regulator. And I know the screen will be up in just a second. FINRA oversees, why is this not? You are seeing something different than me. And there it is. FINRA oversees all stockbrokers and brokerage firms. We work in cooperation with the Securities and Exchange Commission and state securities regulators to oversee what's considered the securities markets. And we have regulatory functions, enforcement functions, and education functions as well. Not only for financial firms and making sure that they understand their compliance needs and the needs of audiences as they change, but also on the education on the consumer side, and that's why we're here today. I work primarily with the FINRA Investor Education Foundation, and the foundation manages targeted projects. We do have some grant making, very small, focused grant making with libraries and with United Way Worldwide and other organizations, where we're looking at building financial capability of different audiences. So as I kick off a little bit about financial fraud, which is why we're here today, I want to give you a little story about Ruth Mitchell, introduce you to Ruth. So about in 2007 it was one of those afternoons about 4:45 on a Friday, and the phone rings, and you're sitting there at your desk, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with the scenario, and you're not sure if you should answer the phone. Is it going to be one of these long calls, you know, it's a summer Friday, or is it going to be something I can address right away. And I decided I should answer it. I'm still in the office, and that's why we're there to serve consumers. And on the other line was Ruth Mitchell. Now, Ruth was calling to tell me that she had been a victim of financial fraud sometime before, she and her husband. And they lived outside of Pittsburgh, and her husband owned a small business, an architecture firm, and Ruth was a professional ice skating instructor. And so Ruth went on to tell me the story of her fraud, and I thought, well, I need to step back, I need to stop her and send her off to file a complaint, because I thought that Ruth was calling me to sort of confess and bring forward and report a fraud. But Ruth stopped me and said, no, my perpetrator is already in jail. I'm calling you because I understand that you're working in financial fraud now, and you're working on prevention, and I want you to share my story. And so for Ruth, the situation that she had been in over a decade of being scammed by someone that they knew and trusted made her desire to be a fraud fighter. It emotionally connected her and put lit a fire under her to get out there and help others. Her husband, Len, however, was incredibly, sort of became a hermit and became very retracted because of the scam. And their situation here was exactly the same. They went through the same experience, and yet the emotional consequence of the experience was very different for both of them. And as we go through our presentation today, I want you to think about that and how any clients that you may be working with may be having a different emotional impact and emotional reaction to the fraud situation that they may be in, if they are indeed in one or being targeted for one. Now, a quick story about Ruth and Len. They were victimized by their accountant. It was a family friend who had come to know them over a number of years. He was doing their taxes for Len's small business and came to know their finances, and then started doing their personal taxes, and one day offered them a mutual fund that he was selling. As it turns out, this fellow, Barry Corkin was his name. Barry was not licensed to sell securities. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is the importance of double checking that people we're working with, no matter whether we trust them, no matter how long we've been working with them, that we verify that they are in fact licensed to do the business they're trying to do. And in this case, if Ruth and Len had checked to see if Barry was licensed to sell stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, and there's a free and easy online way to do that that doesn't require anything about Barry's life. He doesn't even need to know. They would have at least asked more questions. Hopefully they would have avoided working with him altogether, but he was not licensed to sell securities, and what he sold them was a fictitious mutual fund, and turns out to be a Ponzi scheme. So let's talk a little bit. Ruth and Len, unfortunately, are not the only people that face this situation. We don't have solid prevalence numbers in the United States, and we're working on that. The FINRA Foundation is working with Stanford University and the Bureau of Justice Statistics to update the National Crime Victimization Survey to include a financial fraud unit, and that should be coming out in the next NCVS wave, or at least the questions will be going out in the next NCVS wave. But our estimates with Stanford are that approximately $50 billion per year is lost to financial fraud. And I'm not talking about consumer corporate scandals or any accounting scandals. I'm talking about consumers like you, me, and your clients. And what we find is that through additional survey work, 8 in 10 have been solicited for potentially fraudulent offers in the last year. I would argue that these are adults over the age of 40 in this case. I would argue that the other two probably just weren't even paying attention that they were potentially fraudulent. I'm guessing that almost everyone has been targeted at some point in the last year across a variety of financial scams. And we do find that Americans age 65 and older are more likely to be targeted, and tend to be more likely to lose money once targeted than respondents in their 40. But there's a big debate going on about age, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later. It's not just about how old you are. It's more about that targeting. And lastly, to emphasize the point that I made with Ruth and Len and their different emotional experience, nearly 2/3 of victims report experiencing at least one non-financial cost of fraud to a serious degree. This is in survey work where we worked with known victims of fraud and a separate population of non-victims. And we find that the victims of fraud report, stress, anxiety, difficulty sleeping, depression. These are ongoing social and emotional consequences that are well beyond the financial consequence that they're already impacted by. So who's at risk? Before we get into this, I want to, and I say, anyone can be a victim, but I'm going to take another poll, and I'm going to ask which of the following describes the sort of the typical characteristics of an investment fraud victim. Investment fraud. So take a guess on this one, or if you're knowledgeable. Going up and down in the polls here, I see. This one's a little bit hotly debated. All right, well, the poll's slowing down here, so I'm going to go ahead and close it. And what we find is, in fact, that 43% of you have the answer that our research shows, which is the most likely victims of investment fraud in particular, which is only one form of financial fraud, do tend to be in that 55 to 65-year-old age range, financially literate, and risk takers. Now, everyone experiences risk or takes risk to a different degree, but I want you to focus on that financial literacy comment. It's not, with financial fraud, it's not so much about knowing everything about finance. It's more about being in tune with persuasion and influence, and that's where we're going to focus today. Let me see if I can get you back to the right application. All right, perfect. All right, so as we just discussed, investment fraud victims, this comes from some survey work that we did with AARP, and it's actually been repeated a number of times by the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, AARP, and other instances as well. And we really find that investment fraud victims are a different pool than other financial fraud victims, for instance, lottery fraud victims, which tend to be more likely to be the single older consumers who have lower levels of education and income. Now, is it about the financial literacy? Is it about education? Is it about income? What do we know? Well, there's a number of factors that influence victimization. There's no single victim stereotype because there's no single type of financial scam. There's many different types, but they all share some similar red flags, and that'll be part of our next section. There's really a variety of ages that are related to fraud victimization, and it's beyond age. Sometimes it's all about gender or income or education or social connectedness. There's some discussions about isolation or the importance of having socially connected environments as we age, not only for our financial health and but our mental health and our physical health as well. But there's also a number of psychographic factors, including our own sense of risk tolerance, our perceptions of debt. Some FINRA Foundation research shows that actually people that have a sense that their debt is high tend to be victimized more frequently than others. And it's not a causal situation, but there does appear to be a correlation. There's also correlation with impulsivity and potentially with financial literacy. Now, with financial literacy, it can, depending upon the scam, be a reverse correlation. So it really comes down to the role of targeting. We ran a regression analysis across a couple of studies to see, is it income, is it gender, is it education? What is it that's most typically driving victimization? And what we find here in this graphic is that solicitations, it's really about targeting. The more frequently people are solicited, the more likely they are to eventually succumb to a scam. And that's where you come in. All of us have a role to play in being a fraud fighter, and we can carry prevention messages, whether it's just for ourselves and our family, to our extended family, but also into our communities and with your clients. And we need to warn people of risk of financial fraud, but we need to be really careful in how we do that. Because if I said to each of you at the beginning, how likely is it that you're going to fall victim to financial fraud, most of you would probably say, you know, not likely, but someone I know probably would be. Most of us have a sense of bias against our own vulnerability. We call that the illusion of vulnerability. So we need to teach consumers that they are vulnerable, but not by saying you are vulnerable, but by sharing stories that of peers and others just like them that have also succumbed. We also need to talk a little bit differently about how fraud happens. It's not about being gullible. It's not about being, having the wool taken over you. It's about someone else deceiving us into believing something is true. And there should be no shame in that. We need to be very careful how we represent victimization. We need to help people recognize persuasion techniques, and that's where we'll go into the next section, and take a couple of simple, highly protective steps. There are a number of things we could do to prevent fraud, but if we step back and just say ask and check, and I'll go into detail in what that means, we can really help a lot more consumers. And in your case, it would be important for you to serve as that victim advocate and to help them if someone comes to you or you notice something in your client's finances that look a little funny, that you help them find appropriate resources for recovery, prevention, and reporting. With this in mind, the FINRA Foundation developed Taking Action and an Advocate's Guide to Assisting Victims of Financial Fraud. I did not include the full guide in the handouts today, but I'm going to show you a couple of places where you can download it for free or order hard copies. It's a 80, 90-page booklet, but it's a great resource for professionals. We walk through a number of different types of fraud. We lay that foundation. We present to you some action steps that you as an advocate can play, action steps that for consumers themselves, and additional resources towards prevention. Because unfortunately, in many cases of fraud, the best thing we can do is to help prevent it from happening again. So how does fraud take place? I think it's a perfect marriage of how the financial social work approach attaches emotion to our financial decisions and our sense of self to our financial decisions, because fraud is not about money. I mean, money may be the end result for the person who's perpetrating the fraud, but fraud is not about people's rational financial decisions. Fraud is about psychology and influence and emotion, and the emotional connection that we have with money and with spending. And so fraudsters rely on this emotion, and they use it in many ways. They use it to elicit, sort of in compassionate ways to convince people to hand over their money, to having a sense of affinity or belonging. In the case of Ruth and Len Mitchell, Barry Corkin joined many of their social circles. He was very socially connected to the Mitchells. He joined his ice skating club to be closer to Ruth, and there is a sense of affinity and connection and trust that comes with that. But fraudsters also rely on fear, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how that plays into things. I'm sure many of us have received different fraud attempts and noticed there's often a sense of fear pushed upon us, and certain types of scams rely on that more than others. So when we think about emotion, the FINRA Foundation was working with Stanford University and AERP to look at how heightened emotions play a role in our susceptibility to fraud. And in a laboratory experiment, we brought in consumers who were sort of in an older set, so over the age of 60, and then we had a younger set which was in the 30 to 40 range. And we brought consumers into a laboratory and measured a number of things, but in our two different experimental groups, we elicited either excitement into the group, and it was one at a time, so there were individuals, not a single collective group of excited people. And we had individuals who were in the experimental group that was all about anger and frustration. And then we had a neutral group who were not elicited any particular emotion before they were exposed to the experiment. And what we found, and then we exposed them to a number of advertisements for products that had been deemed deceptive by the Federal Trade Commission. And we just wanted to see how interested were people in these products when they were in these emotional states, and how believable were the ads when they were in these emotional states. And the short answer is, with older consumers, we found that their purchase intention in excitement and in anger went up when they were in either state. They were more likely to intend to purchase that product. And the older adult, or excuse me, and the younger adults did not feel that way. They weren't necessarily swayed by those emotions in the same way for these products. However, with older adults, we found a really interesting finding, I find more interesting, was about credulity, which is how believable was this advertisement. With the older adults, we found that even in the excitement and anger states, when they were more likely to intend to purchase that object, they didn't believe the ad anymore. So they said, yes, I'm interested in buying it, but I don't necessarily believe the ad. Whereas the younger adults, they were more likely to say, I have an intention to purchase it, but only if I also believed it. So there's something going on with emotion that connects us to our susceptibility as well. And the fraudsters know this, and they use and build emotion in a number of ways. And I'm going to talk about 5 quick red flags of fraud. And I don't have time to go today into tremendous detail on this, but I just want to cover the basics. Source credibility, and these are tactics that the FINRA Foundation has been working with AARP and a number of others to try to teach the connection of these tactics to people's emotional states. And we find that if we teach people about persuasion and influence and these tactics, they're more likely to be able to resist that emotional connection. So for instance, source credibility. Source credibility is built, we build it, you're building it in the designations that you carry. You build it in the type of suit that you choose to wear to a meeting, or whether you wear a suit or not, where your office is located, whether there's windows in the office building, having certificates on the wall. We all build source credibility in different ways, and that's okay. None of these tactics in and of themselves are fraud. But unfortunately, fraudsters use source credibility as a shortcut to trust. And so there are certain steps that people can take to make sure that people are licensed, that they do have the background that they have, so that they're not swayed just because they see a certificate on the wall or they're dined at a nice restaurant. And that comes through, I'm going to skip over to reciprocity for a second, which is really that sense that if somebody does something for us, we have an urge to respond and reciprocate with something for them. And then classic case of marketing and fraudsters as well. We find that people will give something small, and maybe it's a break on the commission. Maybe it's today, today and today only, which is a scarcity tactic, but today and today only, I'm going to, do you a favor and don't tell anybody, and it's a secret. That's also a scarcity tactic. But because I'm doing you this favor and giving it to you at a special price, you are more likely to reciprocate by giving me your money. It happens with free dinners, and it happens with mailing envelopes and labels that we receive in the mail from charities. It's not a fraud necessarily to respond and to reciprocate, but it is a play on our emotions, and it's a play to convince us to pass along our money. Social consensus really is about the power of the herd. It's about doing what others do and having people, others like us, who are also interested in that product. And then maybe let's talk about driveway contracting scams, for instance. You may find that in the springtime, there are a lot of driveway gypsies who come around and want to pave everyone's driveway. And their pitch is always the same. It starts with, oh, I was just over at your neighbor's and they've signed up with me and these other people are signing up and your whole cul-de-sac is in on it. And if you also get in on it, I'll give you guys a special rate. And it's all about the power of the herd. Now, phantom riches is a really important tactic as well. And phantom riches is about dangling that thing that we desire. In the case of an investment, it's something that's guaranteed and risk-free. But unfortunately, guarantees and risk-frees don't come with investments in particular. But with our money in general, people want to achieve things with their money. They want to have more money in the future, or they want to have a comfort level with their, with their retirement savings. Maybe they want to pay off their mortgage or pay for their grandkids' college education. There are a number of ways where we can be sold that if we do this one thing, we'll achieve some dream in the future. That dream may be the guarantee, it may be some risk-free opportunity, or it may be paying off the mortgage or buying a boat. And we're sold into the dream of that investment, or we're sold into the dream of that product by this phantom rich, this thing that we desire and that we want that's really not connected to the money, it's connected to the emotion. And all of these things together build a very, very persuasive environment that can be flags for people. And they lead people into it, what's my friend Doug Shadell at AARP calls the emotional ether. It's a place where we're making these emotional financial decisions. They are particularly prevalent and devastating when they're used to perpetrate financial fraud. When we help people understand persuasion and we help them peel back these layers and some of the tactics I'm going to suggest in a minute, we can help them avoid fraud. So real quick, I'm going to cover just a couple of common fraud scenarios that you may be familiar with because I want to make sure we get to the tips and strategies. 4 of the categories, we've classified financial fraud into 4 primary categories for the Taking Action Guide: identity theft, investment fraud, mortgage and lending fraud, and mass marketing and other. I'm going to quickly touch on these. Identity theft in and of itself is not necessarily a fraud situation. It may or may not have been perpetrated through fraud, but it is very prevalent. It's probably something that you see with your clients, and we want to make sure you have resources to address that. So I'm going to skip right to investment fraud for a second. Investment fraud can be perpetrated in a number of different ways, but for the most part it includes some untrue or misleading information, and importantly, an omission of something that would be considered a material fact can also constitute a fraudulent situation. And they often are some sort of fictitious opportunity for an investment. It can involve stocks, bonds, notes, commodities, currency, real estate. There's a number of regulators in this space, and I'll introduce you to them in a second. And you may have heard of Ponzi schemes where one investor's money comes in and is used to give returns to some earlier investor. Or some market manipulation scheme called a pump and dump scheme. I'm going to give you a little example of that. So one way that investment fraud is perpetrated can be through free dinner seminars. Many legitimate companies use this, so the tactic in of itself is not does not mean something's fraud, but they are sales tactics, absolutely sales tactics. And in this particular case, the SEC brought a case against someone who was posing as a financial, an investment advisor. He solicited people at free dinner investment seminars. He promised lofty returns, which is that phantom rich. He created fraudulent marketing materials and cut and pasted numbers from another firm's website. So that's that source credibility, so that the materials looked good, but they really were just nothing but paper. And he concealed his true identity. He had actually been convicted of tax fraud and found liable for securities fraud prior to perpetrating this other scheme. So if people had looked up his name in a database of known financial professionals, they would have seen that he had actually been disbarred from the industry. And he was not registered when he was actually, and they also would have seen that. So there were some flags that had people looked, done a little background work on him, they might have saved themselves some heartache. A pump and dump scheme in particular is one in which we see a particular stock, usually something we call a penny stock or a low-priced stock, that is promoted by some third party to investors, and promoted in a way that says, oh, you know, this is about to take off, you get in early now, it's only, you know, it's really cheap, and so people think, well, what's, you know, what's a few thousand, what's $1,000? I can buy so many shares and this thing's going to go up and then I'm going to make all my money back. Well, what happens with the pump and dump scheme is that these third-party promoters are really just promoting it because they already own shares and they are going to sell them as soon as that price gets high. When they sell them, the demand goes down, the price goes down accordingly. And the individual investors like you and me and your clients are left holding the bag for something that's even less worth anything than it was before all of this started. And so pump and dump schemes, we see them. This is not, it's not just emails that go out. We get calls. People still fall for these. When it comes to investment fraud, it's important that you report to regulators and that your clients report to regulators. FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and all states have a state securities regulator. There's state insurance commissions, and they're actually each on a state-by-state basis. State insurance is regulated on a state basis, but you can find those names and numbers. So if you don't have them already, write them down, look them up. That way, if you need them someday, find out who your state securities regulator is, find out who your state insurance commissioner is, and be sure to have those numbers handy. All three of us, and all four of us really, will share information and across the Commodities Futures Trading Commission as well, the CFTC and the National Futures Association. So we share information. We're all interested in getting bad actors and to stop them from harming others. But we need to hear from you, and so we need to hear from your clients. Please report. Two other important places to report are the Federal Trade Commission and the Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3. I was told just the other day that there are situations where police, local police, may or may not agree to take a fraud report from people. And if they file a complaint with the Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3, they can use that form instead to maybe to present to their bank or to present to some of their financial institutions to show that they actually have been defrauded. So when I talk about police reports, also understand that IC3 reports can be used as legitimate evidence or proof of a report. The Federal Trade Commission is a great place to report. However, they do not provide victim assistance. So they're not going to necessarily communicate back with the victims, but it's important that the Federal Trade Commission and their complaint assistant has reporting, because law enforcement look to that database to find trends and to find cases in their area that they can be going after. Mass marketing fraud, and I need to speed up a little, too much to cover, but mass marketing fraud is really something that you're probably even more familiar with. We see it every day. This is where there are false promises for services, goods, cash prizes. It can be perpetrated through mail, telephone, email, infomercials, and we may be told, for instance, we're the winner of some foreign lottery. If you find a client that says to you, I've won a foreign lottery, I want you to say to them, let's investigate how this lottery, came about and where it's located and how you might have entered. But also, hey, did you know Americans cannot participate legally in foreign lotteries? It's actually against the law. So we need to help people understand, even if you can't convince them that that is a scam necessarily, they might slow down if they think that they are actually doing something illegal. Here's actually a letter that I got at my house. Well, it has Michael Hall. It was to a previous owner at my house. And it said that I had won, or this fellow had won, a sweepstakes in the American Shopper Sweepstakes because he had been to one of these stores: Walmart, Sears, Costco, Home Depot, Office Depot, Staples, Walgreens, Best Buy, Kmart. Now, perhaps most of us on this phone have been on to one of these stores sometime in a year's time. And that's what they're counting on. It's just broad-based. Any of these places you could have been, you're entitled to receive this sum of $85,000, but wait, first you need to pay the $2,000 in taxes, and then we'll pass you the other $82,000 in your winnings. And this is called an advance fee scam, where anyone's suggested that they have to pay a fee in advance. Advance fee scams happen whether it's investment fraud, mass marketing schemes, in a number of different categories advance fees fall. But in general, if you have to pay for something up front, you didn't win it. IRS impersonation scams. All right, I think I have another poll here, which is, let's see. All right, let's see. Here we go. How many of us have received a call from someone who's pretending to be or purported to be with the IRS and is trying to tell us that we owe back taxes? All right. So we're about evenly split between yeses and nos, and some more recently. I have noticed that they've slowed down a little bit now that tax season is past us, but if I probably asked you this in January, a lot more of you might, or February, a lot more of you might say yes within the last month. But I received these repeatedly, and you know, how they work essentially is that someone calls, says they're with the IRS. It may be a robocall, it may be a live call, and demand that you pay back taxes, often in iTunes gift cards or Green Dot cards or some other prepaid card. Starting in 2018, the IRS actually is handing over old debts to debt collectors, and many of you already know this. They did this in the past, they stopped doing it, and they're going to start the practice again. But there are going to be steps that they will use to notify people before they start cold calling anyone on the telephone. And certainly the IRS will not demand that anyone be paid in iTunes gift cards. If someone contacts you, or if you see someone that's involved in anything that involves you know, getting gift cards or prepaid cards in order to pay for something that's not at that store, be incredibly suspicious and immediately report it. If it's an IRS scam, report it to the IRS. Oops, I need to close that. You can report it to the IRS, and if it's not an IRS scam, the Federal Trade Commission takes these reports, as do a number of other places, including the Better Business Bureau. Let me, I've got it up here. The Better Business Bureau Scam Tracker, BBB launched Scam Tracker as a place to consolidate scam reports. There's also fraud.org, the FBI, the Department of State, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. And you know, if you get to know what these resources are in your specific community, in many cases there's fraud task force or a multidisciplinary team that maybe some of you are qualified or in a position to be able to join, you'll find that there's a lot of localized organizations that are trying to take these reports as well, but it's important that we report at the national level so that law enforcement can broadly have a sense of what's going on and go after the perpetrators. For the most part, these mass marketing frauds are being perpetrated by foreign mafias. Not always, and sometimes it's a more localized thing, but in many cases we see that. No matter what, tell your clients, don't respond. Don't press 1 or 2 to talk. Don't ask to be unsubscribed from unsolicited emails. When you hit unsubscribe on emails, unless it's a newsletter that you subscribe to and now you want to unsubscribe, or you've done some research and you know that particular vendor is really the one writing you and you can hit unsubscribe, don't do it otherwise, because what it does is it actually validates that you have a real email address and you will receive more spam for it. Same thing for the telephone. Answering the phone, your cell phone, your home phone, when you don't know the numbers can lead to a plethora of additional calls in the future. I encourage people to look for call blocking services now. There's a number of them that that your phone providers may offer. It could be worth the fee if there is a fee. You can also reduce the direct mail and credit card offers that you receive. Only people that are doing legitimate business would follow the agreements to remove you from these lists. And so therefore it makes it that much more obvious when you start getting solicited for things. When you know you've been removed from a bunch of lists and yet you're still getting contacted, you should be that much more suspicious. So how do you assist victims? Well, when fraud is suspected in these cases, the FINRA Foundation has developed some checklists that are available on saveandinvest.org. This is a website operated by the FINRA Investor Education Foundation, and I encourage you to check it out. There's a Protect Your Money tab, and we have a number of tools there that are referenced here today. And there's some checklists because I'm going quickly over who to contact and how to contact. You can download these checklists and share them and keep them in your office. But in general, what do victims need to know? They need to know that it's going to take some work to recover, but that reporting matters no matter what, that full financial recovery is difficult to achieve in many cases. If it's something with your credit card, you may have protections, but if it's something like, you wired $1,000 to pay taxes for a foreign lottery you won, it's very unlikely that you'll ever get that money back. Civil legal action is sometimes possible. It doesn't always work, but that there are resources, and that recovery is not just about the finances, it's also about their financial, emotional health. And the last thing, and I want to stress this one, there may be silence. We find, you may find a client that says, I reported here, I reported there, I reported here, no one's ever calling me back. It doesn't mean that their reporting didn't make a difference. But in many cases, the regulators or the organizations that we're reporting to are looking out for the bad actors. They're looking out for the fraudsters, but they're not necessarily serving the role of a victim advocate. And hopefully you can help them through that process and understand that there may be silence along the way, that they're not always going to get a phone call back just because they filed a report, but that doesn't mean the report won't help them in the end. So they need to discontinue engagement. Don't answer the phone. Don't answer the mail. Do not respond at all. There is no talking sense into a fraudster. They will only continue to use persuasion to convince people to get even further into the fraud. They need to collect all their files and know their rights. So depending upon the type of scam, in our checklists, we have a list of different rights for different types of products and services. Report to different regulators, law enforcement, their Attorney General office. Many of the state AGs have a consumer protection division that is particularly well-versed in assisting consumers in their state, and a number of other agencies. And I already talked about the Federal Trade Commission and the Internet Crime Complaint Center. And lastly, people should watch for signs of ID theft. In many cases, ID theft is just one resulting implication of the scam. And so people need to be particularly careful to start watching their financial statements and looking out for other signs that their identity is compromised, and consider placing a credit freeze to help limit the chances of that. I already mentioned a number of different places to report scams, so I'm going to let this go. And the checklists themselves speak to this, but you can see there's a lot of different places to report based on what happens. The key is report, report, report. And if you go to the internet and you find a government agency, they can help, or a regulator like FINRA, they can help you find the appropriate place. BBBs are in most communities. The AARP has state offices in every state. The Fraud Watch Network is very, very active, and those can be two great resources for you. IdentityTheft.gov is a new website from the Federal Trade Commission that creates action plans for people that have faced identity theft, and it's really a really great interactive site. So I encourage you to check it out if you haven't yet. And last point on this, and then I've got just a couple minutes left. If people do need assistance with civil justice, the National Center for Victims of Crime is now running what's called the Victim Connect Resource Center. If you just Googled Victim Connect and look for NCVC, you will find that, and they can connect victims to the resources if they don't know who to turn to. So in general, when you're telling people how to handle scam attempts, I want you to think about it from the sense of, if you didn't solicit it, why did it solicit you? And I bolded this one because for the most part, people are out actively searching for something. They're not going to be they're not as frequently going to stumble on the fraud. But if something comes to you, you need to be particularly suspicious. Why was I contacted? Why is somebody trying to sell me something? Why is this coming to me and not my neighbor? Not engaging is also really important. So cutting that clutter, unsubscribing from things so that when you do get solicited, it's just that much more obvious that you're being solicited for something. And having a refusal script can be a really, really valuable thing. And that's something you could do with your clients, is work on what kind of refusal script they want to have. It could be something simple like, I never make any financial decision without first talking to my financial coach or my financial counselor or my accountant or my spouse. But having a refusal script, whether it's true or not, can make a huge difference in buying time for people, because taking that time out, stepping back from the emotion of that emotional experience of the fraud, can help people see the flags before it's too late. One important place I mentioned about checking the background of financial professionals is a free service from FINRA called BrokerCheck. It connects to the Securities and Exchange Commission's Investment Advisor Public Disclosure Database, IAPD. So if you go through the BrokerCheck portal, you'll actually get access to all brokers and investment advisors, and you could see licensing, disciplinary history, whether they're what states they're registered in, what examinations they've taken, and their employment history, so you can see what kinds of firms they've worked for, how frequently they've changed jobs, bankruptcies, and the like. So I encourage you to check out BrokerCheck. It's free. No one ever knows. They don't know. It's not a credit pull. No one knows that you've looked them up. It's on finra.org right there. You can also get to it from the FINRA Foundation saveandinvest.org that I mentioned earlier. But anybody that's working with a broker or an investment advisor or someone who's selling them financial products like this, I encourage them to use BrokerCheck before they ever do business. Other independent sources, I mentioned BBB Scam Tracker and AARP Fraud Watch Network. The Federal Trade Commission has a ton of information in their really good, important scam alerts and information, and the Securities and Exchange Commission's investor.gov. Just a couple, there's many, many, many more. Fraud.org has a blog and a newsletter that you may be interested in subscribing to. I'm going to close here with just some free resources. I have one slide there you're seeing about asking questions. I'm going to skip it because I've pretty much covered those. But we need people to sort of actively engage, actively ask questions when they're being solicited for fraud, because taking the time to do due diligence, taking the time to ask the questions and then independently research whether these things are true can help slow down that decision making. And in many cases, it's just a matter of taking that time. If people don't make an impulsive, quick decision, they're more likely to see all of the flags in front of them. So use FINRA BrokerCheck. The Taking Action Guide goes into a lot more detail than I was able to do today in 55 minutes here. But the FINRA Foundation offers free resources that you could give away to use with your clients. The Taking Action Guide is really just for you. It's a professional guide. But the Fighting Fraud one-on-one brochures are free. You can place them out in the lobby or hand them out when you're with clients, and it gives them a number of places, flags to look out for and places that they can call. We have a number of other resources, two documentaries, one on behavioral finance and one about financial fraud and avoiding fraud. And we have a video game called On 'em If You Can, where people can play the role. So if maybe you have younger clients that would be interested in the gaming space, it's playable on mobile or also on desktop, tablets, and phones. And you can download that from any of the app stores. And you play the role of a fraudster, and you go around using persuasion and influence. But you have to watch out for the fraud fighting agency, because this woman, Fiona, here is on your trail and coming after you. So. But it's a fun way to teach persuasion and influence and help people avoid fraud. All of these materials are available online, free at saveandinvest.org, and another number of other resources there too. So I realize I'm up on my time here, and I want to give people a couple of minutes to ask them some questions. So I'm happy to pause, and if you don't have any, then I'm going to take a couple more polls.
Everyone, there is a question box in that right-hand corner. This is the first time I have ever seen there are no questions in it. Feel free to ask questions. Something I forgot to mention at the beginning is that this is being recorded, and you will receive the recording, but we do not share the slides. And if you have any questions, okay, so here comes one. How safe is it to invest on cryptocurrency, Bitcoin?
And Ethereum.
Right, right.
So I can't say anything about safety or not safety, but what I can tell you is that there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of interest in virtual currency world. I think that like you should very, very, very carefully, or your clients should very, very carefully research what the different risks are. There's pros and cons to everything. There are risks. For the most part, new ventures are higher risk, and certainly I would classify these as higher risk categories. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there's it's not a choice that someone wants to make, but they need to be comfortable that the choice that they're making, that the risk that they're taking is measured, and that they're not risking portions of their savings or income that they couldn't afford to lose, that's proportionate to the risk. So there is always higher risk in newer ventures, and I would place these in this category. But
excuse me, one thing I think we just want to mention is that there are 3 handouts that Christine has shared that you'll see on your sidebar of the webinar control panel that you can click and download.
Dorlee, thank you so much. That's right. They're great handouts. You can just drag them right onto your desktop. And Christine Kieffer, I just want to thank you. Can you just hand the, I know you had some more polls, but if you would hand the presentation back to me, that was really fabulous, Christine. We were so lucky to have you share that. Someone did, okay, so someone did write, oh, now the questions are coming in. So someone shared, this has been so interesting. Thank you so much. Now someone wants to know, do you know anything about Prime America? I get a lot of clients and friends talking about this. Any concerns with this organization? What you tell
I can't speak to specific organizations, but if this person wants to contact me separately, I'm happy to look into what their specific questions are. But I can't broadly,
comment,
say anything about a particular organization. Yeah,
definitely understandable. Everybody, I just wanted you, I'm going to put up Christine Kieffer's contact information. I just wanted to say this is a little bit about financial social work, the certification that we offer, which is self-study and self-paced, and our students have 6 months to complete, and there is a 2-week online exam. And this is more on financial social work. Many of you probably know a lot of it, and that's, oh, I'm trying to get down. Okay, take your handout, and here is Christine's contact information. She was generous enough to share with all of you. And there's another question here. What can the average person do to protect themselves from any type of fraud? I think you did some really good stuff on that, Christine. I think maybe,
I think that, I think the average person just needs to realize that fraud is all around us. None of us is immune. That we need to